let's go back to Immanuel Kant and his critique of pure reason, and let's take a look again at what we have talked about last time, some of the most important parts which are in the introduction and the first part of the book. So the Copernican turn which Kant has introduced is, instead of just taking an object as it is, he suggests that our mind takes part in the construction of the object. We cannot get the object as a thing in itself, as it is in itself. We can never know it as a thing in itself because our mind actually participates in construction of the object when it gets to know it. Our mind contributes to the object itself. Also, in order to get to know it, you are using these types of intuition, the space and the time, which are not part of the object. They are actually part of our mind. Space is how our mind perceives the external objects. It's a part of the furniture of our mind which allows us to get these objects outside of us. Time, on the other hand, is part of the internal furniture of the mind. The mind can only understand things in time with the help of the space. Now, what Kant is saying is that the thing in itself, the object in itself, is neither in space or in time. We cannot know the object in itself as it is simply because we can only know things which are in space and in time. Now, in addition to that, our understanding uses logical categories, concepts, and works on certain principles which help us to understand something. So, for example, we are using a concept of a marker. This is a concept, right? In terms of categories, it would be a substance, an entity. We're thinking of marker as one thing. Is it really one thing? Well, no, of course not. You can immediately see that it consists of parts. In fact, we know now that it also consists of all sorts of particles, atoms. This is a collection of atoms. They, in turn, are a collection of some other subatomic particles. So this is not one thing, but we think of it as one thing because, again, this is how our understanding works. This is part of our understanding. Everything we perceive goes through this kind of net, like a software in a sense. We do that in terms of space, we perceive it in terms of time, and we use these logical concepts, categories, principles of understanding in order to get to it. Now, he uses a distinction there, a priori and a posteriori. What exactly is he talking about? Now, a priori would be here, and a posteriori would be here. A priori is something which is there before any experience. In particular, space and time is actually a priori concepts, or a priori intuitions. They are in the mind before we experience anything else. We do not experience space and time. Space and time is kind of internal software of the mind, which is there to begin with as soon as we are born, I guess. We only learn concepts and categories in terms of words as we grow up. However, what Kant suggests is that is actually universal, and it also is part of a priori human mind. So again, it's before the experience. It does not come from the experience. Now, a posteriori, on the other hand, would be things which we learn from experience. We need to actually go and see something in the outside world in order to obtain a posteriori knowledge. Now, he also says that we learn everything in terms of judgments. We form judgments. And judgments can be analytic and synthetic. Note that I only use synthetic here, analytic and synthetic here. Why? Well, because a posteriori, from experience, we do not have any analytic judgments. The only analytic judgments, which are judgments of clarification, as he says, would be a priori. We do not use experience to find out that, for example, a bachelor is somebody who is unmarried. What do? Well, we actually understand the concept of a bachelor, right? And that alone tells us that it is somebody unmarried. So a judgment, all bachelors are unmarried, would be a type of analytic a priori statement. Meaning, this statement does not tell us anything new about what exactly bachelor is. We already know the bachelor is unmarried. It is unmarried by definition. Now let's look at the example of a posteriori synthetic type of judgment. All bachelors in this class are 6 feet tall. Note the difference. Do we know that all the bachelors in this class are 6 feet tall? We of course don't have a class now, but suppose we did. Would we know that? No, of course not. The only way for us to know that is actually to find out, to go into this outside world and ask all the bachelors, if there are any, how tall are you? Or measure them, better yet. If we measure them, we will find out whether or not they are at least 6 feet tall, whether the judgment actually reflects the reality. For this reason, there are no analytic a posteriori statements, because a posteriori always has to do with experience, with outside world, and we cannot have it as analytic because outside world does not tell us immediately that bachelor is unmarried, for example. The concept itself tells us this. However, he does think that there are synthetic a priori. And this is one of the most interesting types of judgments he is talking about. Now, what would be an example of synthetic a priori judgment? Something like mathematics. He actually talks quite a bit about mathematics, and he says that all mathematics is synthetic a priori. Meaning, we do not necessarily know what, say, 5 plus 7 would be. We have to do some sort of work in order to get there. It's not clear from the concept of 12 that it is 5 plus 7. Now, it may seem a little strange to us because it seems rather obvious that 5 plus 7 is equal to 12. But Kant kind of elaborates on this when he says, well, this is because it's such a small number, but think about longer number. Let's say you have to calculate something like 725 plus 626 minus root 100. Is this immediately available to you what it will equal to? Obviously not. Can you calculate it? Oh yes, you can. Of course. If you have a calculator, that's even faster. But even if you don't have a calculator, you can still get the answer here. You can understand what it will be. However, you need to do certain work. And once you've done this work, you obtain certain knowledge. That knowledge would be a priori, because no, you don't have to go to outside world. You can do the whole thing in your head. You didn't even have to write it down if you have very good memory. You can think about it. 725 plus 626 plus root 100. What is it going to be? Root 100, blah, blah, blah. Right? So you can actually do the entire thing in your head and get some sort of additional knowledge which is not based on the outside world. Now this is the kind of knowledge he is trying to clarify with the entire critique. He's trying to answer this question: what can we know this way? How much is our mind able to understand about the world around us without the use of experience? Because to him it is rather clear that not all knowledge is based on experience. This is an example of knowledge which is not based on experience. I mean, let's face it, how often do you encounter in real life root of 100? And how often do you do this kind of calculations from experience? You do them in your head, you do this on paper, in classes and so on, but you do not actually encounter it as experience, as something you see happening. There are no root 100 birds flying in the sky. However, that is the way we can expand our knowledge. So he calls all the synthetic judgments of amplification, meaning that they give us some additional knowledge about the outside world. And the question he's trying to answer here is, what specifically in this world can be known with the help of this kind of judgments, a priori synthetic judgments. So in a way, critique is trying to answer these questions. How are these unique sorts of judgments possible in general? Synthetic a priori. How are they possible in mathematics? How can our mind actually get there? How are they possible in physics? And how are they specifically possible in metaphysics? How we can find it in order to answer questions about subjects such as God, such as freedom of the will, such as cause and effect. The kind of questions which human mind was always wondering about for centuries. But his point is, every time we were thinking about it before, we were going down the wrong road. You just have to read all these different philosophers to see that. One of them comes up with one idea, the other one with a totally different one. Plato had ideas different from Aristotle. Aristotle in turn had ideas different from some of the more recent philosophers. So what? None of them can get it right? Is it not possible to get it right? And Kant was saying that the problems we have as metaphysics is because our mind never turns on itself and never tries to actually evaluate what the mind itself can know. And this is what his transcendental method is, the transcendental philosophy, as he calls it. Transcendental method is the method which proceeds from the nature of experience in general to the necessary conditions of its possibility. So first he looks at the nature of experience. We're all human beings, we all have experience. We can understand how it happens, how we evaluate it. But the important point here is he tries to look what is necessary in order for us to have this experience in this particular way. And once again, his answer is space is necessary, time is necessary, categories, concepts, and principles of our understanding are necessary. Whatever is necessary, according to Kant, is a priori and exists in the mind as kind of a software as soon as we are born. So this is something we have to use in order to understand things. We cannot possibly understand anything without applying all that. Just try to imagine an object which is not in space and not in time. Think about it. It doesn't have any dimensions. It didn't exist before, will not exist in the future, doesn't exist now. Is it an object? It's a thing in itself. Now, I did draw it here as some kind of a cube just in order to illustrate the point that we do not perceive it the way it is, because note that the way I draw it here as an object, that is like a square, right? Well, if you look at the cube from a particular point of view, you would see it as a square, wouldn't you? Now, what's the problem though? Well, it's not the same thing as a square. It actually is a cube. You just don't see the other sides if you look right at it. So this is his point about any object. He's saying we do not see all there is to these objects. And we cannot see it simply because we lack necessary structure. Our mind is not made in order to do that. The way our mind has been made by nature or God or whatever is within space and time using these logical categories. Now, of course it is somewhat incorrect to say that the thing in itself is like a square, because what would that imply? It would imply it actually is in space, right? It's three-dimensional. The true thing in itself would then have to be something like, I don't know, this? Well, not even this, because a dot is already a spatial object, isn't it? This? This is a little bit more like it, right? But something here. In fact, his actual point is even more subtle. At some point he's saying that when we say thing in itself, we're using a negative concept. Negative in the sense that we're saying it's not object as we perceive it. Now there is a way of having it as a positive object, in a sense that there must be some way to actually understand what it is. But according to Kant, this is not something we can do. He calls this noumena. Noumena is a positive object as it is in itself. And according to Kant, well, if there is God, and he never specifically says that there is one, but if there is God, this is how God would know objects. But we can't, because it would be outside space, it would not be in time, and none of the categories, none of the words we use would apply to it. Now, what we can know on this side, the object as we know it, he calls phenomena. Now, unlike noumena, phenomena is the world we know. And note the important difference with Berkeley. He's not saying we are constructing it completely. There is real objects, matter of experience. Remember the cookie dough. We get the cookie dough, we're just shaping it. It is something real. However, how it is real can only be known by God. We cannot know that ever, or at least as human beings. Perhaps in some other life, if we are no longer physical body, outside of space, outside of time, perhaps then we could have what he calls intellectual intuition, and in some way get to noumena, get to those things in itself. So here's the important point too, which he ends up getting to. That part, things as they are in themselves, noumena, this is where we would find God, freedom, concepts like this. In phenomenal world, everything is determined. In phenomenal world, we cannot really know God. Because again, God is not in space. God is not in time. God is not one of the categories or concepts we have access to with our limited mind. They are things in themselves. They are noumena. Now, this is the essence of Kant's philosophy. There's perhaps just one more thing we need to address here. One more important thing he talks about in A edition. He does not go that far into this subject in a B edition, even though it does seem to be very important. And one of the reasons is, again, because he was criticized for essentially becoming like Berkeley, essentially saying that the world is constructed by our mind, which is, he put a great effort to convince us this is not the case. So what is it? It is the concept of a self, I. He talks about it as an important, a very important, perhaps the crucially important component necessary in order for this whole thing to work. However, he distinguishes it. Remember Descartes. Descartes was talking about I exist, therefore I am. Now Kant saying that Descartes, the way he describes himself, saying I am a thinking thing, describes the empirical self, the self of the phenomenal world, because that is the self which is doing the thinking. What is the transcendental I? What is the actual person behind that, or entity behind that? Now that we do not know, and that is actually here. That I, we can call it ego. Transcendental ego. That is a concept in itself. We do kind of have a feeling that it is out there behind our thinking. But our thinking is just a phenomenal type of I. That is empirical I. That is something which is related to this world. Whereas transcendental I, it's something which is behind it. It stands behind everything we do. But this is a necessary point when everything comes to the crossroads, where everything intersects. Space, time, concepts of understanding. They kind of come to this one point. And that point is the transcendental self.